You are now watching Believe. Do you believe?
Go single! Jarvis nuts!
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
And we're the three best friends that anybody can have.
I mean, my initials are WVU. I've been a WVU fan my whole life.
They shouldn't have played the old Golden Blue. Not this night.
Owen Schmidt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Now joined by Jed Drenning, West Virginia sideline reporter.
Are you ready? Are you ready for some football? You want the noise brought on you? Because here it comes.
You're in the right place. You are in the gun.
Because once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 153 here of your new favorite WVU football podcast. And we have got a different roundtable on this edition of ITG. And we've also got a little bit of breaking news to discuss here as the calendar has turned to April. What's going on, everybody? I'm Wesley Euler, best teammates in the business. As always, we've got the producer, Skylar Callahan, who is sitting in for Big O on this one. And, of course, the signal caller, Jed Drenning. And you already know that this episode of ITG is brought to you in part, as always, by our friends at Bet Online, where the game starts. Final Four coming up this weekend. If you're looking to get a little action, make sure you visit, or check out, I should say, Bet Online. Gentlemen, this is one of these breaking news, one of these just more, or maybe I should say less formal editions of ITG here, as we've got some pretty significant news in this ongoing conversation about the landscape changes of college football. We've had plenty of those. I mean, this podcast is coming up on its 2-year anniversary here in a couple months. We've already had a few of these conversations. NIL, transfer portal, conference realignment, right? All these different ever-changing things of the college football landscape. And I think one thing that everybody agrees upon is that this is not done. We are still evolving. We are still changing. We have not reached, as I think Jed will say here in a minute, the final form of college football as we will know it. Today, another moment, another kind of landmark, another significant piece of news in that ongoing change, and that is that a group of sports executives and college presidents are proposing a football super league of 80 schools that would pay the players, collectively bargain, and increase revenue. And there's always a local angle to this, right? Because this is a football podcast. This is a WVU football podcast, but there's an even more WVU tie to this, as one of those college presidents who is involved is West Virginia University President Gordon Gee, who was actually, if you read this article in The Athletic and in Sports Illustrated, who have been kind of the Stuart Mandel in The Athletic working on this, Gordon Gee is quoted in these articles as well, too, and is one of the people that is part of this. So that's a lot of word vomit from me. That's where we are here. Jed, I know you've got notes on this. I know you've got thoughts on here, so I'll come to you here first. Kind of lay this out for us. What are we looking at? What does it mean as we stand here in early April?
You said, Wes, before we came on the air, and you made a fair point. You're like, there's a certain element of fatigue with these types of stories, because it seems like every 48 hours there's some version of something like this going on that's grabbing headlines. So what you have to do is you have to decipher at some point what has teeth and what doesn't. And this one in particular, you mentioned Stuart Mandel. It looks like he did this in conjunction with a writer named Andrew Marchand. I think I'm saying his name right, at The Athletic. The headline kind of spells it out. Inside the College Football Super League, one powerful group's idea to fix a dead system. Now, by powerful group, I agree with that. We'll get to that in a minute. But part of this, I'm going to kind of just read excerpts from it, and we'll discuss for clarity's sake. Don't want to miss anything out here. But the general overview is this. They have a grand vision of putting together truly a super league of 80 college football programs. College football, it sounds like, not college all sports, college football.
Right. Yeah,
programs,
just football. Yeah.
There will be 10 divisions of 8 teams. They will play on the field to determine who wins the divisions for an automatic playoff berth, and then 8 wild cards, so 16 teams. And you will play it much like the NFL, all out on the field. It won't matter how pretty your logo is. It won't matter how much history and rich history your program has.
How fat your endowment is.
It won't matter about your endowment. There won't be, voters voting for the East German skater because they're prettier than the other one. It will be played on the football field, okay? On the football field. And people have the indictment that I've heard with any kind of idea like this in the past. What do you want to do that for? You already got that in the NFL. Yeah, who would want to emulate on any level the most successful sports enterprise in the history of America, right? I mean, don't you want to extract some of the better ideas? Because it's patently unsustainable what's playing out currently with college football. And you'll hear President Gee use the word existential. Now, that's an often overused word these days. But in this case, I think it's true. This is an existential crisis for college football. And if you want to talk about who this is, it's coming together to formulate this notion of this plan. This is from the story. Several college presidents, Roger Goodell's primary lieutenant at the NFL, and some sports top executives have devised a plan, dubbed Outsiders as a super league, to completely transform college football. That's what those involved in the group College Sports Tomorrow told The Athletic. Now, you have the president or the chancellor, I should say, from Syracuse, saying the current model for governing and managing college athletics is dead. Point on. It's hard to dispute that. West Virginia President Gordon Gee added, "We are in an existential crisis." Spot on, President Gee. This cannot continue. I mean, I have said for the last 2, 3, 4, I don't remember how many years, it seems like forever now, that we will at some point soon start the era of watching 30 for 30 style documentaries for the rest of our lives about, man, how did they survive that period of sports in college? How did they do that? Because right now, this wild frontier, it's not going to continue. I'm a firm believer that at some point in the possibly very near future, but certainly imminently, we're going to see a level of change in college football that by comparison will make the change we've already seen seem like almost nothing. I truly think so. This is going to be transformative, whatever it is. Maybe it's this, maybe it's something else, but I do think whatever comes down the pipe will look something like this. Now, if you want to get a little more granular and discuss what it is they're talking about the 80 teams that constitute what would have been the Power 5 programs, including the Pac-12. So sounds like good news for Oregon State, Washington State, if in fact this reaches fruition. Some people are fearful they might get left behind. So it looks like all the teams from the previous Power 5 conferences and Notre Dame and SMU, it sounds like, are going to be part of this 80. Now, you might be asking, well, what about the other 50 or so odd teams that would make up the rest, which right now, by and large, are the group of 5 teams? Well, this proposal or this plan, I'm not even sure what nomenclature to use to describe it right now. I don't know if it's a plan. What they would do is they would involve those 50 or so odd teams in some version of relegation, much like the European soccer leagues have, giving them the opportunity to play their way into the Super League of 80 teams. So maybe they can knock one of the low-hanging teams out and replace them. I'm not sure how that would be structured, but these are all the types of things that are on the table. So no matter how you stack it, it's fascinating. Now, of course, an obstacle would be the current TV deals that are already in place. So I would imagine having a firm seat at the table in any kind of discussion like this as well, if you're going to take them seriously, it would have to include those TV executives as well as administrators, as well as presidents, as well as these other folks on the college sports front. You're going to have all these people, even NFL executives, as we talked about, have all these people in one room, forming a committee, ironically, because committees will have nothing to do with the postseason in this situation. So this says that those two and Gee are part of a CST, a 20-person group, which also includes the NFL's number 2 executive, Brian Rollop, Philadelphia 76ers owner, David Blitzer, and lead organizer, Lynn Perma of Turnkey ZRG, the firm that places nearly all the top conference commissioners. So there's some heavy hitters in this room. There are some heavy hitters in this room. Now, one thing I've always heard about President Gee, when you cross the fruited plain and talk to others about President Gee scattered across
Bow ties.
this country. Bow ties, that's correct. He is connected in a level that's hard to match. He really is. He's one of the most connected people in all of collegiate, I think, not just athletics, but even academics. He's an incredibly well-connected guy. He's a power broker if ever there was one. So it makes sense to me that President Gee would be at this table taking part in this discussion. But once again, we revisit, and this was my turn for word vomit, and I'll pass to Skylar. We revisit. We don't know what's going to happen here, but this is spawned from the fact we know something has to happen, because what's going on right now, I can't stress this enough, is patently unsustainable. Change has to come. It's a function of what that will look like. Skylar, they're talking about paying the players through a rev share deal with the TV contracts. That's what they aspire. That's the brass ring they're trying to capture.
Yeah.
What do you make of all this as we see it so far?
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense because, I mean, you can't have a lot of schools able to compete because they have, like Wes was saying, all the money in the world that they can have at their disposal, and other schools are scrapping for pennies in the couch. You can't have that situation. I think when you look at the NFL, one of the main reasons why they're the most successful league is because there's parity. So when you get more parity in college football, or really any league, then you're going to have more eyeballs on it because you're playing competitive games from start to finish. Because if this happens, this means you're playing 12 Power 5, what we call Power 5 opponents. You're not getting East Carolina. You're not getting Delaware State. You're not playing those teams. You're playing competitive D1 Power 5 games from week 1 all the way to the end. So I love it. The only thing that I don't know how they're going to do it is the whole dispersing of the money. Like, is every team going to have the same amount of money to work with? Are all the players going to get paid the same exact amount of money? Or is there going to be different levels to this? Are there tiers? And how do you police? Because, I mean, it's always been an issue with guys getting paid money under the table. How do you police that now in this kind of era?
Wes, here's what I don't see. I don't see this happening without some sort of organization on the player side. That's what's missing here.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We talk as though we can just decide the fate of these student athletes, and we can't. I mean, the Supreme Court has made it abundantly clear with their 9-0 ruling. Stay out of their way. Don't you dare try and inhibit their ability to move on any level. So I think one of the things to make this necessary, they're going to have to ultimately organize and then make certain concessions in some sort of, for lack of a better term, collective bargaining agreement, and let the power brokers on the other side, on the college and university side, know what it is they expect and what they want. Because people have often said, Wes, you and I have talked about this, why can't we have a salary cap for NIL? No. That's not how this works. You may, in fact, and to your point, Skylar, you may in fact have a cap on what each school can disseminate to its roster in putting together a roster, just like the NFL does. That's a cap. But what you can have is a cap on NIL. NIL is name, image, likeness. The NFL can tell the Kansas City Chiefs, look, you can pay Patrick Mahomes whatever you want, but you can't exceed your entire team payroll. What's the cap going up to? It's taking a massive jump to like $250 million this year.
I was going to
it's
say mid 200s, yeah. Yeah,
let's say it's 250. So they can pay Patrick Mahomes 249 if they want. But that's not good business, right? They got to hash it out, distribute a little more evenly what makes best sense for them. In the NFL, 5 or 6 players make most of the money on the roster. So you have to decide, okay, that's your cap. That's what the NFL can limit. You can say you're not allowed to spend more than this on your team. But you know what the NFL can't limit and can't touch and can't put a finger on? They can say, hey, pay Patrick Mahomes whatever you want, but you can't pay the Chiefs more than $250 million. But they cannot say, and oh, by the way, Patrick Mahomes, you're only allowed to make X amount from State Farm commercials.
State Farm can only pay $1 million a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
He can make $10 billion from State Farm if State Farm's willing to pay it. That is the closest thing you're going to get to name, image, likeness. You can't cap that part of it. You can only cap the more distributed part on the other side.
And I think Herbie, he's been on this for a while now about the TV money needs to be distributed out to the schools and then to the players, because That's how they should be getting paid first and foremost. The NIL stuff should be just extra cash to the side that they're making.
Absolutely.
The number one revenue driver for these kids should be the TV money because they're the ones that are putting the eyes on the screen. So I don't know.
And their bodies in harm's way.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of word vomit thoughts and questions and different things that you guys have said here in the last few minutes that I've jotted down. But first, let me thank our friends at Toothman Ford and our guy, JR. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. I tell you what, yeah, you a super league of NIL sponsors here. Toothman Ford's leading off that roster, baby. Okay, couple things. Jed mentions relegation, and I just use that Super League term again here, which was used by Stuart Mandel. Like, I didn't just make that up. And it's funny because both of those things have ties to European soccer. Relegation, listen, the three of us know what this is. And if you're like a sports junkie, you probably know what relegation is. But real simple for you. In European soccer, so in England, right, for the Premier League, like with Manchester United and Manchester City and Liverpool and all these teams, there's 20 teams in the Premier League. But there's 5 tiers of professional English soccer. So there's 20 teams in the Premier League, and then there's 20 teams in the Championship, and then there's 20 teams in League One, and then there's 20 teams in League Two, and so on down the list, right? If you've seen the documentary Wrexham, right, with Ryan Reynolds and what's his name from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Rob McElhenney, right? They bought that soccer team in Wales, and you've seen they're trying to get the team promoted up the tiers of UK football. Every year, the top 3 teams from the Premier League fall down. The top 3 teams get promoted. That's promotion and relegation, and it happens for every league.
The bottom 3 teams, correct?
Sorry. Yes, except for the other. So if you're in the second tier and you finished third, you're going up to the first tier, baby. Top 3 are going down, or bottom 3 are going down. Pardon me. Top 3 are going up, obviously, unless you're already in the top division, and obviously you're not going down if you're already in the bottom division. But you can have clubs who will spend 15 years. They'll have a great owner. They'll have a great coach. They'll spend 15 years in the top league, and then the owner leaves, the coach leaves, they fall apart, and it's 30 years before they get back. You know, they end up getting relegated, and it's a long time before they get back.
I have so many thoughts in my mind wondering what this might look like if it comes to pass. I mean, there's a lot.
Oh, it'd be amazing. Like you'd have James Madison, and Vanderbilt playing for promotion.
That's what I'm saying. Let's say Troy is smoking everybody, and Jared Parker gets those guys hot again, and they're just cooking with gas. And Vanderbilt's 2-10. I mean, does Vanderbilt have to play against Troy for its right?
Vanderbilt would actually have to care about football. I know that's a crazy concept, but Vanderbilt would actually have to. Stanford would actually have to care about football. Cal care about football. Stanford definitely doesn't belong in the tier with those other 2. I apologize to the Cardinal. No. Cal and Vanderbilt, you got to start caring about football. All right.
Well, hey now, Wes, be careful because remember, Stanford does not accept undergrad transfers.
Well,
I still think Stanford might now forever be dead in the water.
That's a okay. Different conversation. Quit signal caller. Quit interrupting me here. I'm all right. He's on a roll. Okay. The Germans are bombing Pearl Harbor. All right, I'm on a roll here. Let me go. My biggest thing with the whole leaning in towards the NFL revenue, and I get it from sustainability, from profitability, from all those things, it makes sense. But my biggest thing with leaning into that NFL revenue is the National Football League can say every game matters. And to an extent, it certainly does, and absolutely compared to the other major sports. But Skylar mentioned the NFL playoffs expanding now, 7 teams from each conference instead of 6 getting in. Guys, like week 15 of the NFL season last year, only 3 teams in the league had been eliminated from playoff contention. Right?
Yeah, they're expanding playoff games while they also expand the number of weeks they play.
So the games matter. Every game matters, yes, but not in the sense like it did for college football. Every game matters now because every team has a chance to get in. Even if you got a bleeping losing record at times, you can still find a way into the postseason in the NFL. The games mattered in college football because you got maybe one screw up, and then after that, you had better have been buttoned up. No regular season mattered like college football.
Let me push back.
Now, hold on. I'm not done. Okay. That's not my point. That's not my point.
All right.
My point is with something like promotion and relegation, gentlemen, that is the definition of every game matters, because if you suck and your season's in the tank, you can't just turn it off. So a lot of this leaning into the NFL model or looking at how different professional leagues do it, I've always been like, man, like that's not what makes college sports special, right? I'd be into this relegation thing though, because then you would truly be able to say with a straight face and not lying, every game matters. Now, before I let you guys get into that real quick, my final just thought is, Jed, you mentioned how like I feel fatigued. When we got together to record this before we went live, I was like, you can ask these guys. I'm like, are we really doing this? Like we've had these same, are we really doing this?
He's on a roll now.
I'm fatigued. Hey, you guys got it out of me. I'm fatigued by all of these twists and turns, and like we're laughing. Like, remember when the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and the ACC made an alliance like a couple years ago? Where did that? I mean, there's all these big seeming landmark moments that really meant nothing throughout this last decade-ish of big change in college football. What will really change that for me, though? And I see Syracuse involved, and I see West Virginia involved, and Philadelphia 76ers, and Roger Goodell's buddies, and that's great. But if you really want to change college football, and I'm talking this type of dramatic final destination change, unrecognizable from what the game was for so many years, I need some Big Ten, I need some SEC people on board as well, too. 76ers in the NBA is great. NFL is great. Corporate partners are great. But if Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan, if all these schools are still middle fingers, yeah, we're not doing this, it's not going to happen. So that is the final, I guess, piece of getting over my fatigue and all of this. If something like this continues to grow and pick up steam and you get the real powers of the college football world, not the TV world, not the NFL world, not our beloved West Virginia and a program like Syracuse, who are big programs but not power brokers in the sport, we can all admit that, then I'll really start to sink my teeth into all of this.
I think you're right there with it, because I just kind of went through a similar transition with our business, and the whole time there's a lot of uncertainty, and the whole time we just said we got to stick together throughout the entire process. And that's what these 80 schools need to do. Whatever option they go with, if they stick together, it's going to work out. But if you have the SEC and the Big Ten basically saying the hell with what your plan is, giving you the middle finger, then showing you where Wheeling is on the map, then you're not going to get what you want. So, but yeah, I'm right there with you. And I've always said, like I've said for probably the last 10 years, you need to have the Power Five be its own thing, the Group of Five be its own thing, because even back when Cincinnati got to the playoff, like, let's be honest, like they never really had a legitimate chance to actually win the damn thing. When you give them an actual chance to win a championship, it's not just giving those kids a chance. It's giving everybody in those conferences an opportunity to play for something big. When they start their season, North Texas isn't thinking, oh, we got a chance to make the playoff.
You know what? By the time this thing ends, we're going to be going toe-to-toe with LSU in January, boys. All right? So get ready.
So, I mean, I think you got to give those kids an opportunity for something to play for. My question with the relegation is really like, how often is it annually? Because
yeah, I mean, that's how it is in
4
Europe.
years with these kids hitting their eligibility. So is that going to cause kids to want to leave those places? How do you even deal with that? Is it free agency? Is it transfer? Like, there's so many questions to every little piece of this.
And you know what, Skylar, just to piggyback off you real quick on that before we go back to Jed, you guys mentioned the collective bargaining part, right? And the unions that leagues like the NFL have, the NFLPA. I was thinking about this too. There's roughly 1,700 guys, a little less than 1,700 guys in the National Football League at a given time, right? It's something like 1,690 something. I mean, it's basically 17,000 guys that make up the NFLPA, active NFL players at any given time. It's one thing to get 1,700 guys to agree on something. I mean, what's that number going to be if 80 college football teams have a players union? I mean, it's going to be 3-4 times the size of that. You already have enough time getting 1,700 dudes to agree on something. That would be a very, very interesting part of this as well, too. If you're somebody at Alabama, you're like, why is this dude at Vanderbilt going to make as much as I am? I'm at Alabama, So it's all very interesting from that perspective.
And you have to wonder, too, like, is this going to get to a point where agents are a thing in college football? I mean, we've already seen GMs become a thing.
You mean openly?
Yeah, openly. They're allowed to. Yeah, openly, yes. Openly allowed to be agents and working with these kids.
Because they absolutely already are.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Jed, I know you got some thoughts on these things we just said. Before you do, real quick, just let me thank our buddy Rick Lewis. and our friends at Fortis, of course, the best commercial roofing business in the company, folks. For roof performance and financial security guaranteed, you got to visit fortis.us.com.
Yeah, you could give the greatest presentation with the greatest ideas in the history of the world, but if you're giving it to an unimpressed leadership team at the Big Ten and the SEC, to echo your point, Wes, the response is going to be kind of like after the speech at the end of Billy Madison, right? So, you know what I mean? It's going to be very similar to that, the remarks, right? And all of us are dumber for having heard it. So what you're going to have to do, here we come. Here comes the rain. For those listening and not watching,
I'm messing with the Zoom. I'm messing with the Zoom effects again.
Yeah. So if you want to affect change and you want to influence the decision makers in the seats that really matter, not the 20 around the table, if the Big Ten and the SEC aren't among the 20 around the table taking it seriously, you have to show them the money. It's as simple as that. Say, hey, under the current structure, great. You're a big fish in a little pond. Okay, let's talk numbers. Right now, the NFL generates about $10 billion a year. Roger Goodell says he wants that to get to $25 billion a year by 2027. That's insane. I'm not betting against him. $10 billion a year with 32 teams. Well, right now, Power 5 college football with 60 some odd teams, twice as many teams at $3.5 billion. So now I don't think you aspire to catch the NFL financially. There's more to it than that, but you can certainly close that wide chasm. And now let's say you close it by 2. What if you cut it in half? Would you rather be the SEC and the Big Ten as the biggest player in a $3.5 billion market, or a kind of big player in a $7 billion market? So if you can show them the money, and that answers the question as to how you influence and affect change among the leaders in the SEC and the Big Ten, and just as importantly, the partners on the TV side. Yeah. All those people will immediately flip a switch if you show them a revenue stream that's spilling out way more money than the current one is, or a projection of revenue. That's how you get them on board, and they will immediately be all about it. They'll be willing to cede a little ground and say, you know what, being the 800-pound gorilla, if it's worth losing, how many millions of dollars each year just to say I'm the 800-pound gorilla. So if you can expand the overall market and show them that's what you're doing, show them the money. Simple as that, not easy, but in simple terms, that's what you have to do. Now, part of this, Wes, let's start with this. It's not as though we're leaning into a more NFL-like model potentially with these discussions, because the powers that be in college football said, hey, we got a great game. It's going as well as it's ever gone. We got a great bowl system. We got a unique postseason. The Heisman's more coveted than it's ever been. These kids really love these bowl games. They're all eager to participate in. That's gone. It's not like they're saying, hey, let's leave that behind and choose this model instead. No. Everything that I just said is already gone. It's not like they're giving that up and choosing instead this path. That path is gone. It now belongs to history, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
We talk about college football.
Us all getting jacked up to go play Maryland in the Gator Bowl. Those days are gone, baby.
Those days are unfortunately over.
Near and dear in my heart forever, but those days are gone.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. And there will always be an element of sadness because of that. So now it's all about, how do you forge ahead and come up with some version that we can still appreciate and hold dear, because that version's over. We've said so many times, I wish I had a nickel for every time on this podcast we said there was college football 1.0. It started with Rutgers Princeton in 1869. It ended in 2020, then began college football 2.0. So don't tell me how West Virginia won games in college football 1.0. That version is over. We're now trying to invent ways to win in college football 2.0. Well, this may in fact be college football 3.0.
Well said.
And if in fact it comes down to the way they're saying it might, or even some version remotely similar to it, it will be college football 3.0. Now, here's where I was going to say I push back. And you made a great point about the relegation on the every game. That's a part of it that I hadn't considered. But it always drove me crazy when people tried to act like, well, you can't do anything to change the current structure because the college football regular season is so sacred and every game is meaningful. Stop it. Please stop it. Okay. If you
That
lose a
hasn't been
game in
true
November,
for like 15, 20 years.
that's right.
Yeah.
It's still the most meaningful. Yes, it's the most meaningful, but relatively speaking versus the other sports. But if you lose a game in November, it really matters, depending on what the logo on your helmet is. Certain teams can lose a game in November, and it doesn't seem to matter nearly as much. Because
or certain
those
teams
judges
can
that are
go
looking at the
undefeated,
East
but their
German skater,
quarterback gets hurt, and then they end up being left out for somebody that lost games anyways.
absolutely. So don't tell me every game matters when we're playing 60 games in the third week in November, and only 5 of them have potential consequences on the postseason for the national championship, and 55 don't. Stop telling me that. If you lose
That's
a
been
game,
dead.
it matters
It's been
depending
dead for
on
15, 20 years.
This is the most important part. Don't tell me, then don't lose the game, because some teams are allowed to lose the game and some aren't. That's the fundamental flaw in the system. Okay, so yes, the regular season matters more than other sports. So how do we get it to mattering more than it currently does? That's the question. Because right now, to me, it doesn't matter enough. So if in fact 55 out of 60 games played in November, for instance, have no bearing on the national championship or playoff hunt, what do you do about that? Well, if you have a 16-team format like they're tinkering with or talking about here, guess what teams are going to be vying for? Seeding. So every game you play in November is going to matter for seeding.
No doubt.
You want a home field advantage. You don't want to drop out of the top teams that are playing at home and go on the road. You want seeding. Now, Wes, this is where your point was bringing and it comes in. The shortcoming in the NFL, they expanded the number of playoff teams. I've always said one of the things as a pro sports guy, one of the things I most appreciate about the NFL versus the other pro sports, baseball just completely went the opposite direction. So let's leave that out of the conversation. It used to be absolutely make it or break it, right?
Yeah, you'd have to win your division or see you.
When you compare the NFL to the NBA or the NHL, I always said to me the biggest difference with the postseason structure of those 3 leagues is this. The NFL plays the regular season to determine which teams go to the playoffs. The NBA and the NHL play the regular season to determine which teams don't, because so many get in. Well, now the NFL is kind of encroaching on a little bit of that territory, and the mistake they're making, I think, who am I to tell Roger Goodell he's making a mistake when he's worth $10 billion of the league? But they're expanding the number of games they're playing in the regular season at the same time. So what that leads to is less meaningful games or potentially less meaningful games in those final 2 weeks of the season. So you're going to be smart about it. You're going to rest your starters. These types of things are ugly when they happen. So college football could, in fact, maybe encroach on the same thing. I mean, let's say you wrap up home field in the first round, you're going into your final game, you can win with your backups in college ball if this new structure kicks in. Well, one thing to help avoid that for some teams, at least, is that relegation element that the NFL does not have.
Oh, no
and
doubt.
if you are in fact a 2-9 Auburn, we're here at Auburn, Vanderbilt, we're piling on Vanderbilt. Let's keep going.
Yeah,
and let's say you're a 2-9 Wake. Okay. Guess what? You're scoreboard watching going into the last week of the season because you're trying to go 3-9, hoping Vanderbilt goes 2-10.
Some of the best atmospheres you will ever see in your life in any sport. You'll have the 17th place and the 18th place out of 20 teams in England playing on the final day of the season, and the winner stays up in the Premier League and continues to make big money and all that and play for all the biggest competitions, and the loser loses hundreds of millions of dollars and goes back down. I mean, you want to talk about stakes? Like, yeah, you got 1-11 East Carolina against 2-9 Rutgers, and the loser, see ya, you're losing out on hundreds of millions of dollars.
Skylar hit on the part that I've wondered about before. Every time relegation comes up, I think about roster retention. Okay, so what do you do? There's no easy answer there. Now we're getting way out in the weeds with this, but let's say that you have some sort of 2-year obligation under this new structure where you're getting paid part of the TV revenue. Well, can you really hold a kid to stay at one of these teams that drops? That's not the deal he signed up for, right?
Right.
Now, you could argue he's partly responsible for them dropping because he's part of the team that's losing. But at the same time, maybe what happens is you treat that as kind of a carve-out or a one-off. Look, if you're relegated, you kind of get a free pass like right now you do if your coach is fired. That type of, I don't know, but you would need to get creative in terms of Yeah, you sign with a school. It used to be you sign to play for 4 years. Of course, that's no longer the norm either. But you sign with a school. Just imagine if you're Vanderbilt and you're boy, we're really hammered on Vanderbilt. Imagine Vanderbilt recruiting.
Some Vanderbilt blog or some Vanderbilt Twitter accounts go find this and put it out and be like, look at these dipsticks from West Virginia talking trash on us, and we're gonna have 30.
Should I jump?
We're gonna
I'll tell you what.
37 baseball dorks and engineering students in our mentions.
Hell with Vanderbilt. Hell with Shiano. I'm going to go with Rutgers.
Yeah.
So let's go with Rutgers. Okay, even better. I love picking on Rutgers. So let's say you're Rutgers and you just finished a 2-10 season, but because somebody else was 1-11, you didn't quite have to play for relegation to stay alive. So you get to stay as part of the Power Five or the Super League. You're part of the 80, and you're not knocked out. Well, let's say that everybody recognizes you lost most of your roster through attrition or whatever it might be, and you might be worse this year. Good luck recruiting, because now you're going to tell you, what are you going to pitch a kid?
Well, how
that you might drop to a lower level next year.
Jed, that's the same thing. That's what happens to all these European soccer clubs. You know what I mean? Like
they under contract. What happens?
Yeah, so they have no draft, no nothing. Like it's a lot like kind of like you can sign these kids whenever you. So like David Beckham, right? He starts playing. He signs a contract with Manchester United when he's 15 years old. Now he plays for their youth team until he's like 18, not till he's good enough to go up to the senior team. But there's no draft, there's no whatever. If you're good enough and teams want you, you could sign with whoever you want, much like recruiting. So yeah, when you're a program that's fallen down, or you're a team that's fallen down the board, not only are you losing money, not only are you losing revenue and all these things, you're also losing your ability to attract and pay for and recruit the best talent.
I do have to point out what weirdos we are, that here we have possibly this salvation that saves college football as we know it, and it could have this grand postseason to determine who the national champion is. And oh, by the way, West Virginia wouldn't be a fringe team in this. We would securely be part of this, absolutely and obviously.
Yeah,
and despite
100%.
all that, we spend 2/3 of the episode talking about which team finishes 80th out of 80.
Well, here's the most important point about it too, is you talked about it, Jed, like the Big Ten and the SEC, they have to be on board with this. But I think it's more so the schools that have to be on board with this, not necessarily conferences, because if this does go to 80,
board of trustees,
is the Big 12, Pac-12, or not Pac-12, SEC, ACC, Big Ten, are they even going to exist when they go to this? Because this is all going to be shifted to where you only have 10 teams in each league.
So
you know what I'm saying?
It's funny. I was saving this as my final question or thought for you guys, and it piggybacks perfectly off of what you just said there, Skylar. I think a lot of us are assuming that this will be 80 teams in one league, right? And it's the top 12 or 14 or 16 or whatever go to a playoff, right? And then maybe the bottom, however many, 5, 6, 7, 3 are fighting for promotion and relegation. What if instead of that, it's an 80-team Super League that's broken up into 4 20 teams? So you've got the Northwestern Conference, you've got the Big Ten, you got the SEC, you got the Big 12, you got the ACC, right? Whatever. And there's 20 teams in each, 20, 20, 20, 20. And the top 4 from each conference go to the playoff, right? And then maybe this is up, bringing another European soccer thing here to continue turning certain listeners of our audience out. That's how they do the Champions League in European soccer. So best 4 teams from England, best 4 teams from Spain, best 4 teams from France, best 4 teams from Italy, best 4 teams, and on down the list, right? And then they all go and they compete to be champions of Europe. So you could be champion of England, or you could finish 2nd or 3rd in England, and then you could go on to compete for champions of Europe, kind of how like we do districts and state playoffs in high school sports, right? Like a lot of times you don't necessarily have to win your district and you can still qualify for states. It's that same type of thing. They do that, but then they also do the teams right immediately after that compete for a secondary European championship. So there's the Champions League, and then there's the European Cup. So it's kind of like national championship. And so you could have these 4 different 20-team super leagues, right? Keep them the same name so that those conferences, Big 10, ACC, Big 12, SEC, top 4 in each conference automatically go to the college football playoff. And then the next 2 in each conference, or the next 4 in each conference, go to the NIT or whatever we're going to call it. And so I think that too really incentivizes every game matters. And I think too, if you're an Alabama fan or an Ohio State fan listening to what I just said, you're probably like, who gives a crap about that NIT? Like, are you kidding me? But if you're I'm like, dude, let's go get it. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I'll go win a European Cup. I don't give a crap. Like, let's go do something. That'd be a blast. Like, we'll be going up against Oklahoma State and Pitt and Virginia Tech and schools like that competing for a championship. Are you kidding me? That would be amazing. Rutgers, Maryland.
The question would be, again, if you hearken back to the early days of the NFL, I think is kind of where we find ourselves right now in some ways. Pete Rozelle was the commissioner of the NFL in the 1960s, had to go pitch this notion of, look, the TV partners have divided us and they're conquering us. We need to have some solidarity. We need to have one front with one voice. I'm that voice. Trust me with the inventory. Now, the hard part and the tough sell was going to the Chicago Bears, going to George Halas and saying, hey, I know you got this sweet deal that hardly anybody else has with NBC Chicago, and it gives you this big advantage over these other teams. You're going to need to give that up and trust me with the inventory to deal with these TV partners. Right. He had to go to the Giants and say, hey, you and the Bears have these carve-out deals. You got it with CBS New York.
That's a great example, Jed.
Okay, so look, you're going to need to give that up and trust me with all the inventory. So the question becomes,
who's that person for college football?
Yes, well, you're going to need a football czar. You're going to need a football commissioner.
It's
but the
Jed
question becomes the bigger question.
All right, that's who it is.
I'll take it. The bigger question is this. If you sell the SEC, the Big Ten, the TV partners on the show me the money concept, here's the money, but here's what we're going to need. Yeah. You're going to have to throw all the parts on the table, and I need the inventory. Now, that might mean that Alabama and Auburn land in a conference with West Virginia and Boston College. It might mean that. We don't know. But I need to be in charge of the inventory to make the most sensible approach to these divisions and these 80 teams. I'm not just going to say the SEC will by and large stay the SEC. The Big Ten will by and large. It won't. It can't work like that and have true parity. If you're going to divide it up and have an automatic bid for each division winner and then wild card, you're going to have to divide the premier brands as well and scatter them across each of these divisions, I would think. So whoever does this is going to need to have the authority with the inventory to make the changes that are necessary. And that's why I go back to what I said at the top of the show. The changes could, in fact, truly be seismic and make all the changes that we've seen that have preceded any of this seem small by comparison, because it could completely reinvent nearly everything we know about college football, including who calls other teams and other programs conference mates.
And gentlemen, I think that's the perfect way to wrap this up. I think that's a cherry on top of a whipped cream by the signal caller there. We do have to thank our friends at Johnson Equipment as well, too, before we get out of here. Make sure you're checking out their new location on Route 33, right outside of Weston. So there you go. This was, I don't know what here, 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes, something like that. We just asked all the questions. Now it's up to you to go find all the answers, everybody. There's a million different scenarios and possibilities and questions for you. You're welcome. Obviously, every time we discuss a story like this, I feel like I always say as well, too, this will continue to be something that we will keep an eye on and discuss as we go forward here in the history of your new favorite WVU football podcast, In the Gun. For the runaway beer truck, Owen Schmidt, for the producer / co-host, do it all, Skylar Callahan, and the signal caller, Jed Drenning, I'm Wesley Euler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week. You've been In the Gun.